Earlier this year, Chris Watts' former prison cellmate, Dylan Tallman, released a new book series that claimed to substantiate the long-suspected view that Nichol Kessinger was in fact the driving catalyst and accomplice to the crimes that Chris Watts committed the morning of August 13th, 2018.
Now, Dylan Tallman was in the cell next to Chris Watts for around a year. According to Tallman, Watts told him that Kessinger gave him an ultimatum on the night of the murders. It's your family or me.
In the 6 years since Watts' conviction, he has continued to leak small but important details about his true motivations for committing one of the most unspeakable crimes of the last decade. In today's episode, you will hear a detailed analysis and timeline of the day-to-day events that transpired surrounding the most critical moments of this case. We will review the facts taken directly from the discovery evidence, subpoenaed phone records, witness statements, as well as the new claims found within Dylan Tallman's new book series, The Cell Next Door. A series that continues to support the claims and unmistakable signs that Chris Watts has far more to tell. This is Searching for the Truth, the first installment of the Chris Watts Deep Dive series. The case against Chris Watts has continued to capture the attention of millions of people all around the world. And for so many, that interest is fueled by the desire that everyone involved in any crime should be held accountable and brought to justice. And it's for that reason that I want to state clearly that Chris Watts is solely responsible for his own actions. And regardless of any new information that may arise, he is exactly where he belongs. So with that said, let's begin. By late July of 2018, Chris and Shanann Watts were living two entirely different lives on either sides of the country. Several weeks prior to the 31st of July, Shanann had left with Bella and Cece to go to North Carolina to stay with family. But while she was away, Chris was preoccupied living a double life with his new secret girlfriend, Nichol Kessinger. During this time, Chris and Nichol spent countless hours together, speaking on the phone and texting daily, going on jaunts to the sand dunes and the Shelby Car Museum, essentially living life as though Chris's family did not materially exist. Chris continued to demonstrate to Shanann the actions of a husband that was uninterested and disconnected, while at the same time knowing full well that he intended to stay with Nichol Kessinger no matter what the cost. And everything that would transpire over the next 13 days would become the focal point of a crime that left far more questions than answers. The morning of the 31st of July at 4:58 a.m., Chris called Nichol Kessinger and spoke with her for 5 minutes. The two would continue to speak throughout the remainder of that day while Chris was flying from Colorado en route to go be with his family for a week-long trip to North Carolina. In the years since his conviction, Chris has admitted that on the very first night of this trip, he attempted to poison Shanann and cause a miscarriage by giving her a dangerous opiate that he was never prescribed, while at the same time vowing to never reveal who provided him that medication. This text message from Shanann demonstrates the clear signs of opiate ingestion, and while Shanann was becoming violently ill from her reaction to the drug, just minutes later at 10:19 p.m., Chris snuck away to get on the phone and speak with Nichol Kessinger. The discovery records show a relatively uneventful day for Chris and his family on the 1st of August. But by that evening, Chris would again call Nichol while on a family vacation with his wife and children and speak with her for 68 minutes. On the 2nd of August, Chris was with Shanann and his children taking pictures of them at a local park. But while he was doing that, he also began receiving various nude and suggestive images from Nichol Kessinger, the same mistress that would go on to claim this.
He went to North Carolina and he was like, I'm going to talk to her when I'm in North Carolina and see if I can get her to do this, to try to rekindle the flame. And I thought I had convinced him to try to make peace with her. And I was like, if you guys work on this, like, I'm out, because what's the point?
At the same time, while Chris was with his wife and children, he was also storing nearly a dozen pictures of Nichol to his secret calculator app. Chris would continue this ritual of calling Nichol once Shanann and the girls were asleep throughout the remainder of this trip. But on this evening, Chris would speak with Nichol for nearly an hour and a half. The 3rd of August was another relatively uneventful day for Chris Watts during his family vacation to fix his marriage. But as usual, he would somehow find the time to call Nichol Kessinger around 9 p.m. Despite only speaking with her for just under 15 minutes, Chris did find the time to receive and store pictures from her on his secret app just before going to bed that evening. Prior to Chris's arrival in North Carolina, the infamous Nutgate scandal and the widespread fallout had already transpired. It was a considerable fight that had broken out between Shanann and Chris's mother Cindy Watts over Cece's nut allergy. The argument seemed to be the final straw in years of spoken and unspoken animosity that had finally come to a head. Throughout that day, Shanann continued to text Chris over her concerns about his family, as well as his total lack of interest in her or his children. The discovery records would later reveal that Watts was communicating with Nichol Kessinger during this entire period of time through text message, but also most likely on a different app like Skype altogether. But while Chris and Shanann were arguing over his disconnected apathy in their marriage, Nichol Kessinger was happily focused on the future of her new relationship with a married man. Just after midnight on the 4th of August, Nichol Kessinger spent 2 full hours searching for wedding dresses. Later that same day at 2:10 p.m., just after Chris and Shanann's massive argument through text message, Nichol searched Google for both Chris and Shanann's Facebook accounts. The same account where Shanann was posting public pictures of her vacation with Chris and had already announced her pregnancy to all of her friends and family. At 4:52 p.m. that day, Shanann texted her friend to tell her of her concerns over the clear changes in Chris's behavior. She explained that she noticed that he had changed his cell phone wallpaper that was previously a picture of the two of them, but had been changed to a picture of the sand dunes. The exact same sand dunes where weeks before Chris and Nichol had vacationed together. And now, for the 5th day in a row at 8:49 p.m. after Shanann, Bella, and Cece have already gone to sleep, Chris and Nichol would speak for 42 minutes. The 5th of August was a sad day for Shanann. She spent most of that day texting Chris, sending him a quote by Isaac Cuveruno that reads, "Husbands, stand up for your wife and protect her from the attacks that come from the people close to you. Let your family and friends know that when it comes to your wife and your marriage, there is a line that they cannot cross. And if you have to take sides, then always take your wife's side." This was clearly Shanann's plea to Chris to fight for their marriage, to fight for her. Sadly, though Shanann suspected, she could not have known just how far gone Chris already was, and the collision course he was determined to maintain. And just before the end of that day, around midnight, Shanann sent one final message to her husband. "I just don't get it. You don't fall out of love in 5 weeks. How can you sleep? Our marriage is crumbling in front of us, and you can sleep?" Sadly, Shanann clearly didn't know that Chris wasn't at all asleep. In fact, just minutes after she sent that message, Chris would call Nichol Kessinger again for their nightly rendezvous and would speak with her for an hour and a half. In the discovery report released by law enforcement, they notate that Chris had deleted many of his text messages from his phone, and they never provide evidence that those messages were ever recovered. But on the 6th of August, Shanann would spend most of that day pleading with Chris to communicate, to fight for their marriage, and to be the father he said he wanted to be. It's at this point that we start to see how incapable Chris Watts was and is of being direct or honest in any of his dealings with Shanann, or anyone for that matter. While Shanann is trying to address his lack of interest in her and their children, he's continuing to receive nude images of Nichol Kessinger. And right after hiding the evidence of his relationship with his mistress, he pivots and proceeds to try and ameliorate the situation with Shanann by telling her, "I don't hate you. I will fix this. It will be better." Shanann rightly replies with incredulity, to which Chris can only say, "I don't know where my head is at. I'll fix it. And I'll never understand why he just didn't ask for a divorce." But it's at this moment that we see just how intelligent and wise Shanann was, because she responds by saying, "Something's changed in the last 5 weeks. Something you won't say." 15 minutes later, at 10:33 p.m., Shanann sent one final message to her husband. It reads, "All of these asking for you to talk to me. You falling asleep at 7 or 8 p.m., don't tell me it's me. It's not communication that's the problem. You're not telling me something." At this exact same time, while Shanann is pleading with Chris to just hear her and respond to her attempts at communicating, once again Chris is on the phone with Nichol and will be for the next 50 minutes. And while Chris is ignoring his wife and indulging in a fantasy that will soon abandon him, he is choosing a path that will destroy everything that he has ever claimed to love. A path that from the moment he set foot on it became the beginning of the end. On the morning of August 7th, Shanann woke up early and sent a text message to her friend Addie describing the fight that she had had with Chris the night before. She said, "Chris told me last night he's scared to death about this third baby, and he's happy with just Bella and Celeste and that he doesn't want another baby." Addie did her best to try and comfort Shanann, encouraging her by saying that everything would be okay once Nico was born. But Shanann knew something was very wrong. She replied by saying, "He's changed. I don't know who he is. He hasn't touched me all week, kissed me, talked to me except for when I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. He's been distant since I left." Knowing just how spot on Shanann's intuition was just days before Chris would prove her right is incredibly hard to read in retrospect, especially when you see what she said to Addie later in that same conversation. "I told him last night I don't feel safe with him after what he said about the baby. And if he loves me, he would hold me and tell me it will be okay. Give me something," and he did nothing but just go to bed. It's at this same time that Nichol Kessinger begins a strange pattern of making short phone calls to local police departments in her surrounding area. And it was that same day that the Watts family traveled back from North Carolina to Colorado, the very last time that Shanann, Bella, and Cece would be seen by their family again. By the morning of the 8th of August, Chris had returned to work, but the contention between him and Shanann had not improved at all. At 7:24 a.m., Shanann received a text from her friend Sarah, who asked if things were any better between the couple. "No, it's so bad, and I don't know what to do." She explained that she attempted to show Chris physical intimacy the night prior, which he rejected. And the notations in the discovery records tell you everything you need to know about this moment in time for Shanann. It reads, "Shanann said that she hadn't cried this hard ever." In Shanann's conversation with Sarah, she reveals that she had confronted Chris the night prior, asking him if he was having an affair, a claim that he emphatically denied. And I can't help but wonder why Chris is so allergic to the truth. Why not just tell her, get a divorce and move on? Because as we can see, even with such limited information, Shanann was on the right path, because the very next thing she said was, what else would make him do a complete 360? An hour later at 8:52 a.m., Chris's friend Josh Rosenberg asked him if he was excited about the ultrasound. Chris's facade of a response was to say, "Yup, today's the day. I'm excited." Knowing Chris's affect, I can literally hear how he would have said these words, and I'm not sure a human being is capable of providing a less enthusiastic response. But later that afternoon, Shanann and Chris attended the ultrasound, confirming that Nico was a perfectly healthy baby boy. By 7:25 p.m. that same day, Nichol Kessinger was Googling topics related to marrying your mistress. Searches that were likely fueled by the daily marathon phone calls that she and Chris had maintained during his supposed trip to fix his marriage. And it's evident in the limited records law enforcement did release that during this time, Chris was placating Shanann and everyone else in his life, while at the same time preparing to start a new life with Nichol. Details that are only further established by his actions that night, because at 9:54 p.m., Shanann texted her friends that Chris had just told her that they were no longer compatible. He denied her any form of comfort and need for reassurance, all while refusing to go to couples counseling. But while Shanann was fighting for what little remained of her marriage, Chris was still pretending to everyone that they knew that he was the interested father who truly cared about the future of his wife and children. At 10:19 p.m., Shanann would tell her friends that if she had to, she would fight for custody. But while she was trying to make sense of the chaos around her, Chris was already on the phone with Nichol in the other room and would continue to speak with her until almost midnight that night. But despite it all, Shanann's friends continued to try and encourage her. And just before she went to sleep, on the heels of her life completely falling apart, Shanann opened Google and searched for couples therapy. On the 9th of August, Chris would take the day off from work to watch Bella and Cece, since Shanann was going to Phoenix for her Thrive work retreat the following day. But by 3 a.m. that same morning, Shanann was already up and messaging her close friend Addie. She explained that she was canceling the gender reveal in response to Chris's cold and indifferent reaction to her pleas for reassurance. Addie responded by asking if Shanann had gone through Chris's phone to see if he was having an affair. Shanann replied by saying that she had already asked him if he was cheating and he absolutely denied it, but that she hadn't taken the time to look through his phone yet. However, she did say that she noticed that Chris was deleting messages from his father, but that she still believed that Chris was not stupid enough to actually attempt to have an affair. Sometime later, it would be revealed that Chris had already communicated to his parents that he was intending on divorcing Shanann. It's likely that at the very least he didn't want Shanann knowing what his parents already knew, let alone everything else that Chris was hiding on his phone. That same day, Chris Watts deleted his Facebook account, while Shanann spent her time searching for marriage counselors. At 6:09 a.m., Shanann asks Chris if he wanted to go with her to find out the baby's gender. He eventually replied with a one-word answer, yes. And just 3 hours later at 9:20, Chris again logs into his secret calculator app. At 10:06 that morning, Shanann shares a picture of Nico with her close friend Sarah, seemingly to find any semblance of joy in a home where it no longer existed. And it's at 11:44 a.m. when Chris sends this disturbing and now infamous picture to Shanann. Because it's at this moment in time that many believe that Chris had now fully committed to his plan to commit the unspeakable acts that he would complete on the morning of August 13th, 2018. Less than 90 minutes later, at 1:15 p.m., Shanann would text her friend Sarah and report to her a surprising and unexpected development. All of a sudden, Chris has now agreed to go away with Shanann to work on their marriage the weekend of August 17th. Shanann was in complete shock, but moments later had already begun making plans for the two of them the following weekend, and was already asking Sarah if she was available to help watch Bella and Cece. 30 minutes later, Shanann texts Chris and asks him why he deleted his Facebook account. Chris would never respond. Just after 3 p.m., Shanann asks Chris if he will drop Bella off on her first day of school the morning of Monday, August the 13th. Chris responds by saying, "I can make that happen." A short time later, Shanann orders the book Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love, a book that she desperately hoped that Chris would read. Law enforcement would later find that same book while searching the Watts family garage. They found it inside of the trash can. Right at 4 o'clock that same afternoon, Chris would get on the phone with Nichol Kessinger and speak with her for about 38 minutes during her drive home from work. And at 7:37 p.m. that evening, Chris messaged his coworker Troy McCoy to tell him that he was taking that next day off from work. And in his message, he added that he would meet with Troy the following day to exchange the Amazon Fire Stick. On its face, it would seem to be an unimportant conversation, but in reality, that meeting would go on to become a critical component of Chris's premeditated plan and would further help to expose Nichol Kessinger's alleged involvement. 45 minutes later, at 8:17 p.m., Shanann messaged her friend Addie again. Addie asked Shanann what the gender of their child was, and Shanann's response was to tell her that Chris wanted to wait to announce the gender until Monday, August 13th, the same day that Chris already knew that Shanann would no longer be around to announce anything at all. She even mentioned in that same conversation that Chris was talking and kind of acting like himself again, but that he was still very distant. By 9:12 p.m. on the evening of August 9th, just 4 days before Chris's crime, Shanann revealed the name of their son, Nico, to her friends. She also happily told her friends that she and Chris had talked and that it had been the best conversation yet. A short time later, Shanann spoke with her friend Sarah again and regaled her with how happy she was that Chris had told her that he loved her back, that he seemed less cold than before, and that he even kissed her before he went to sleep alone in their basement. She seemed overjoyed that Chris had spontaneously changed his mind and was now agreeing to go to counseling, and had even said that he would read the book she ordered, on top of already agreeing to go with her the following weekend for a getaway to help fix whatever was broken with their marriage. Chris had given Shanann the one thing she wanted more than anything else: hope. But by now, you are likely no longer surprised that while Shanann was having this conversation, allowing herself to believe that hope had cause, Chris was downstairs in their basement talking to Nichol Kessinger for nearly an hour, while at the same time logging onto his secret calculator app, waiting for the program to load, and then transferring nude selfies of his mistress into the hidden folder that had now become a mirror-like representation of his life. Friday the 10th of August was a good day for Shanann Watts. At 6:20 that morning, while at the airport en route to Phoenix for her work conference, Shanann texted Chris and seemed to be in a pleasant and upbeat mood. Despite Chris's detached and cold affect, Shanann remained positive and encouraged him to have a good time with Bella and Cece. Later that morning, just before 8 a.m., Jeremy Lindstrom would text Chris, congratulating him and Shanann that they would be having a baby boy. A short time later, Chris would parlay upon Jeremy's goodwill and ask if his daughter McKenna would be available to watch Bella and Cece the following evening. Chris would lie and concoct a fake story about having won tickets to go to the Colorado Rockies game with his coworkers that he didn't know. But since Shanann was gone, Chris took the opportunity to set up a date with his mistress, and it was a date that he didn't intend to miss. After some back and forth conversation, Chris confirmed that McKenna was set to watch the girls the following day from 5:30 to 10 p.m. Just before noon, Shanann sent Chris a link to Ann Meadows' real estate website, a realtor that they intended to use to help sell their house, which was already nearing foreclosure. In addition to everything else that was already going on, Chris and Shanann Watts were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments and were facing down another bankruptcy that would have very likely resulted in them losing their house. But what transpired next in this segment of time, I believe, is one of the many clues that helps to demonstrate that Chris Watts premeditated his crimes against his own family, but also that Nichol Kessinger likely played a vital role in that premeditation. In the early afternoon at 1:34 p.m., Chris texted his coworker Troy McCoy concerning their previously agreed upon meeting to exchange the Amazon Fire Stick. The exchange was taking place so that Chris would use the Fire Stick as a replacement for cable TV and as a means to help save money. The two men would meet to exchange the device at 3:05 p.m. in a Safeway parking lot in Fort Lupton. Once the two met, and at the same time that Chris and Troy were conversing, Troy received a call from Cody Roberts, a fellow Anadarko employee. Roberts told Troy that there appeared to be a leak in the bypass line at the oil well at Survey 319. Conveniently, Chris Watts just happened to be standing right in earshot of their conversation and without hesitation volunteered to go to Survey 319 first thing Monday morning to fix the line. An action that just happened to provide Chris with an excuse that he needed to go to Survey 319 and execute his plan. And just 6 days later, on August 16th, Nichol Kessinger would be interviewed by CBI agent Kevin Kobach and Timothy Martinez. And during that conversation, agents learned that Nichole's primary responsibility at Anadarko was to manage the gas monitor sensors, the exact same sensors that would have alerted Cody Roberts to notify Troy that there was a problem. And it's been my experience that when it comes to a crime of this magnitude, there's no such thing as coincidence. Throughout the remainder of that day, Chris would search the internet for various activities that he could do with Nichol, including searching for restaurants in anticipation of their date the following day. Towards the end of the night, at 9:20 p.m., Shanann called Chris and they spoke for just over 10 minutes. This was the first day in a long time that Shanann felt hope and that her efforts to try and save her marriage were finally working. But within 90 minutes of their call, Chris would open his secret calculator app and transfer this video to the hidden folder.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I am having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I am so out of breath.
The morning of the 11th, Chris and Shanann would exchange upbeat conversations surrounding the girls and other household-related topics. Around that same time, just before 7 a.m., Jeremy Lindstrom asked Chris if he would rather go with him to the Broncos game that night instead. Chris responded by concocting a lie so that he could continue with his plan to see his mistress. Just a few hours later, Nichol Kessinger spent 45 minutes searching for topics that I cannot repeat on this platform. But as you can see for yourself, one could never argue that Nichol Kessinger has class or leaves anything to the imagination. Around 12:30 p.m., Chris tells Shanann that McKenna, Jeremy Lindstrom's daughter, is coming to watch the girls while he goes with his co-workers to the baseball game. Shanann reminds Chris to inform McKenna of Cece's food allergies and to lock her office door. A few hours later, Chris and Nichol speak on the phone for nearly 30 minutes, and by 4 p.m., the babysitter had arrived at the Watts residence to watch Bella and Cece. Without wasting any more time, Chris quickly left to go meet with Nichol, where the two would eventually land at the Lazy Dog restaurant for dinner. At that same time, Shanann was checking in with McKenna, which she would continue to do throughout the night while making sure the girls were still okay. Just after 9 p.m., Shanann searched Google for the score of the Rockies game as well as the time that it ended. It was very likely that Shanann knew that the game was already over and that Chris should have been home at or before 10 p.m. But right at 10 p.m., Chris finally messaged Jeremy Lindstrom to inform him that he would be home in 20 minutes. 4 minutes later, Nichol Kessinger got onto Google and made the following disturbing searches. She searched for Chris Watts, Shanann Watts, Ronnie Watts, and finally, the address of Chris Watts' home. At 10:15 p.m., Shanann called Chris and the two spoke for just over 3 minutes. By this point in time, Shanann already knew that Chris had gone to the Lazy Dog restaurant because he had paid the $62 bill with their family debit card. After their call, Shanann was distraught and relayed her dismay to her friend Cassie and exactly what she had just learned about Chris's activities that night. Shanann and her friends searched the Lazy Dog's menu and the restaurant's location. And by 10:28 p.m., Shanann texted Chris, asking him to save the receipts from the Lazy Dog so that they could use it as a write-off, sending a clear signal to him that she already suspected what he was up to. And just 3 minutes later, Chris Watts began a 51-minute-long phone call with Nichol Kessinger, the beginning of a series of important calls that would transpire over the next 72 hours. Calls that, despite all of law enforcement's claims of having completed their investigation, have never been described in any considerable detail whatsoever. The morning of August 12th began with Shanann continuing her fight to save her marriage by sending a text to Chris at 7:32 that read, "Good morning, baby. Love you." Soon after, Chris deleted that message, which was later verified by law enforcement when they confiscated his phone. Not even an hour later, while Shanann was desperately communicating to her friends about what went wrong in her marriage and how she can fix it, Chris was back on the phone with Nichol Kessinger, talking to her for over 30 minutes. At 10:32 a.m., Shanann texted Chris asking for pictures of the girls. The pictures that Chris Watts sent are some of the last known to have ever been taken of Bella and Cece Watts. 13 minutes later, Chris searched Google for Mount Colima and saved an image of this volcano spewing lava and smoke. Nearly at the same time, Nichol Kessinger was communicating with her close friend Charlotte, discussing intimate details about her new relationship with Chris Watts. A conversation that Nichol would go on to delete from her phone entirely, while at the same time telling her friend Charlotte to do the same as well. A disturbingly odd series of events that law enforcement would never bother to fully investigate. 11:13 a.m., Shanann asks Chris if the girls were napping and inquires if he's available to call, saying that she would love to just speak to him for a moment. But it's no surprise to anyone by now. Chris never attempted to make that call. Shanann would take the following selfie at 12:17 p.m. It's one of the last known pictures to ever be taken of Shanann Catherine Ruschek. By 1:30 p.m. that afternoon, Chris had brought the girls over to the Lindstrom family's birthday party. While at the party, Chris would receive text messages from his father, just checking in. A short time later, Shanann would reach out to Chris and do the same. She asked if the girls were having fun. Chris acknowledged that they were. Shanann would respond by saying, "Good, I'm glad, I love you." And again, Chris would not respond. And after reading these records so many times, it would seem that Chris Watts' apathy was just a sign of him mentally preparing for what he already knew he was about to do. Exactly 1 hour later, at 4:56 p.m., Chris again Googled another picture of a volcano. However, this time, he searched for Paricutin, a semi-dormant volcano located just west of Mexico City. Just after 5 p.m., Chris sent his coworker Cody Roberts a text message offering to go to Survey 319 the following morning. Roberts responded by saying, "I was going to head out there first thing tomorrow to check out 319. Did Troy talk to you about what I found out there Friday afternoon?" Chris responded back, "Yup, I was standing right next to him. I was giving him a fire stick to look at. I can go out there though. No sense in both of us going out there. LOL. And can I just say, what grown man types the word LOL to a coworker that often? I'm just saying, Nichol Kessinger had clearly rubbed off on Chris in the worst way possible.
It's me. I miss your face. I was just calling to say hi. Call me back. Bye. Hi. It's me. You guys just call me back when you have a chance. Bye.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you had to be reminded what I was talking about. By 6:09 p.m., Cody Roberts had responded to Chris, thanking him for what he believed was kindness and initiative to go out into the field first thing that morning. Something that we would later learn was very out of the ordinary for Chris and his coworkers. Shanann texted Chris just before 8 p.m., knowing that it was the girl's bedtime. She asked Chris to send pictures, to which he provided her with updates on his progress to get them into bed. Watts would eventually send this final picture of his beautiful daughter Bella to Shanann. Despite everything that Shanann knew, she continued to try and maintain a positive outlook on a situation that was already crumbling apart. Eventually, she and Chris would speak on the phone for 9 minutes, and right after they hung up, she texted him, "Sorry I bothered you. I just wanted to talk to you." We have no evidence that Chris Watts ever responded. Shortly thereafter, Shanann's friend Addie called Chris and spoke to him about issues that she was having with her vehicle. While the two were speaking, Shanann sent Chris a message, thanking him for taking care of the girls over that weekend, thanking him for helping her while she was away focused on work. At 9:09 p.m., Shanann continues to try and communicate with Chris, and it's clear that she can sense something is seriously off with him. She already knows that he was lying about the baseball game. She knows that he spent way more money on his food at the Lazy Dog than he could have possibly spent on a single plate of salmon. She knows that Chris didn't come home until almost 10:30 at night. And yet, despite all of that, at this moment in time, she was asking Chris what kind of vegetables he wanted with dinner that next evening. It's now 9:13 p.m. and Shanann sends her friend Addie a draft of the message that she wants to send to Chris the following day on August 13th. It's a message that Chris will never receive, a message that Shanann will never send. For most of the last 6 years, certain members of the public have taken the opportunity to psychoanalyze every perceived mistake or failure that Shanann ever made. The truth is, if my life, if everything I have ever said or texted or every mistake I have ever made was compiled in a couple thousand pages of records that reduced my life to words absent of context, I imagine that none of us would come out unscathed. But this next message is a testament to who Shanann Ruszczyk was. The message reads, "Can you please tell me something? Because just like you, I'm in my head. I try to fix things and make them better, and this is making me crazy. I know you need time. I want to give you what you're asking for and respect your space. I need some time. This place that I'm in my head, it's not a good place. It's not healthy for me, for Nico. I need you to help me help you. I need you to give me just a little bit of what I did or didn't do, so I'm not going crazy in my head trying to figure it out. I know I can't fix this by myself, that we are going to have to work together." 16 minutes later, at 10:29 p.m., Shanann attempted to call Chris to tell him that her flight had been delayed, but Chris was not asleep. Chris Watts was already on the phone with Nichol Kessinger, and this is when the books of Dylan Tallman begin to shed light on what Chris and Nichol actually said during the 111-minute phone call. In Tallman's first book of the series labeled The Cell Next Door, he explains that the two inmates were assigned cells directly next to each other. Tallman was in cell 13, and Chris occupied cell 14. The two would become close friends, sharing very similar religious ideology that became their central focus of daily biblical study. Over time, Tallman earned Chris's trust, and we learn that Chris began to share parts and pieces of what happened and why he was there. Midway through his book, he shares a discussion that he had with Chris, wherein they begin discussing his relationship with Nichol Kessinger, who he now refers to as Jezebel. And this is the segment of Tallman's book that immediately grabbed my attention. Referring to the night of August 12th, during the 111-minute phone call, the book reads, "It was near the end that the mistress tried to make Chris choose between her and his wife and kids. Chris claims that he chose his wife and kids and that Nichol was not too fond of that decision. So Dylan asked Chris, 'When did Nichol make you choose?' And it was at that moment that Chris would admit to Tallman that it was the night of the incident. And just in case it isn't clear, that would mean on August 12th at 9:28 p.m., Chris Watts spoke with Nichol Kessinger for nearly 2 hours. And on that call, she demanded that Chris choose between her and Shanann. And her demand would receive even more clarity in Tallman's later books, and I assure you, we're about to get to that. At 11:21 p.m., Chris finally gets off the phone with Nichol and immediately responds to Shanann's text message telling him that her flight had been delayed. It was the last lie that Chris Watts texted his wife Shanann while she was still alive. Shanann's friend Cassie would receive a text from her confirming that she had landed in Denver just before 1:30 a.m. This would be the last and final outgoing communication that would ever be sent from Shanann's phone. At 1:48 a.m., the Watts family Vivint security system logged Shanann's entry through their front door. And from 1:48 to 4:23 a.m., no further movement was detected on the main floor of the Watts family home. It's this period of time that has become the primary source of speculation by the media, the public, and even law enforcement. The expeditious conviction of Chris Watts left so many unanswered questions, and while we cannot know with any degree of certainty whether or not Dylan Tallman's books credibly answer the questions that so many of us still have, it is important to remember that Tallman is a self-admitted career criminal who has spent most of his adult life in prison. Inmates on that level of security lockdown are not exposed to the media the same way that we are. In fact, in his books, he admits that he didn't even know the details surrounding the crimes that Chris was convicted of, which is why his recitation of the conversations that he had with Chris appears to ring true. But as always, I'm going to let you decide. Towards the end of Tallman's first book, he recalls a discussion he had with Chris where he was advocating for him to file various pleadings via the appellate process. It's there that Chris responds by discussing the moment that Shanann walked through the door after arriving home at 1:48 a.m. My wife came home and she knew that I was having an affair and we got into a fight. Chris then jumps ahead in the story and tells Dylan, "After a while, I talked to Nichol and I confided in her, and she said she would help me." Chris then claims that it was Nichol who told him what to do and how to dispose of Shanann's remains. And Chris also states that it was Nichol who told him to bring the girls with him in his truck. Tallman eventually asks Chris why he didn't call the police. Chris claims that he had never been in trouble before and it was his first instinct to call Nichol. However, there's no call record of Chris ever calling Nichol after Shanann arrived home. But law enforcement themselves admitted that Chris and Nichol were communicating via some other app that they never found, which would explain how Chris was receiving images from Nichol on a near daily basis. And it's why in my first video, I suggested that law enforcement should have and still could ascertain if Nichol and Chris were communicating on an app like Skype. Because Tallman states in his book that Chris told him that after he had already ended the life of Shanann, Nichol Kessinger showed up and met with Chris to help him get rid of the evidence. That Chris told him Nichol was the one who came up with the idea of what they should do, including helping Chris dig the holes at Survey 319. Chris also claims that it was Nichole's idea to not speak with law enforcement, that she was the one who told him to lay low while promising to marry him. And that worst of all, it was Nichol Kessinger herself who told Chris to choose between his family or her, alleging that Nichol Kessinger told Chris to finish what he started, referring to his own daughters. Now, I want to be crystal clear. We cannot know if any of this is true. I am simply reporting what Dylan Tallman's books say, but if you've watched any of the videos that I've made concerning Nichol Kessinger, then you already know that she has something to hide. That law enforcement, specifically Weld County DA Michael Rourke, has categorically refused to properly investigate the evidence that hundreds of thousands of people have begged him to investigate. And many of you have already heard my conversation with former police investigator Jason Fry, a man who has investigated homicides and a litany of other related criminal actions, who has stated emphatically that law enforcement in this case had a duty to properly vet Nichol Kessinger, and they failed to do so. It's why I believe she disappeared from the face of the earth immediately following Chris Watts' conviction. And it's why she rushed to hire a lawyer before anyone knew anything about her, but not for criminal defense. Nichol hired a slander and libel attorney to shield her from what she already knew was coming. Because so many of us believe that Nichol Kessinger knows that a day is coming when the truth will come out, and she will no longer be able to run from it. But until then, I will leave you with something that my grandfather taught me many years ago, an expression that he imparted during some of the most important moments of my life. It's simple, but it's true. Whatever is done in the dark, one way or another, the truth always comes to light. This first installment of the Deep Dive series is dedicated to Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico, as well as the whole Ruschek family. As a community, we all know that justice can sometimes take longer than we want it to, but we will never stop advocating for it, no matter how long it takes. And someday, when there is a new Weld County DA, I'm looking forward to sharing the hundreds of pages of research that I've compiled that I believe will aid in their investigation and be the final step towards justice. In closing, I want to take a moment just to remind each of us what this time of year truly means. There are so many people like the Ruscheks and the Rochas where the holidays are difficult. And I know that there are people within this community, maybe even you, that are alone for the holidays. So that's why I want to take this moment, this opportunity to remind you that no matter who you are or where you're from or what you are doing, you are so important. And I don't say those words as some cliche parasocial form of encouragement. I actually mean those words. And it's why I never miss an opportunity to remind you that you are valued, you are appreciated, and I truly mean those words. It's funny, over the years, I've seen people who write in the comments and say that when I talk this way, that it's not genuine and that I am somehow motivated to say these things for any other reason than I actually mean them. But many years ago, I learned the importance of just appreciating life, being grateful, being thankful for the people that support you. For me, it's these people who have for the last 2 years come alongside me, even while I've been sick and facing uncertainty with my health. These people have been gracious enough, have been kind enough to show support in such a meaningful way. And that's exactly why I made this channel, because I know there really are truly good people all around us. I know that because this community is full of them, people just like you, people who use their voice to stand with the victims of these cases and their families, people who just want to make a difference. So for this holiday season, I want you to know that you have made a difference by making one in my life. So thank you for the gift of your time. because it is a gift to me. And I always look forward to the next time that we can meet again. I hope each of you have a wonderful holiday season with your families, with your friends, and if for some reason you are alone during the holidays this year, feel free to reach out, because you are not alone. So as always, this has been Behind Criminal Minds. We'll see you next time.